What is it that the fall is telling us? Here we no longer struggle with the issue of biology, but we raise the question of what's going on with sin here? How does sin come into the world? How does it spread? How does it come to all people? How does this imagine original sin? But we should notice that as we ask those questions, we are asking our theological questions. And before we ask our theological questions, we need to pay attention to the story the text is telling. And for that, we have to reach back into the ancient world and understand the context of Genesis in the ancient world. We have these two trees in the Garden of Eden, and we wonder what they are. We've got the tree of life, and we've got the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is basically the tree of wisdom. A tree of life, a tree of wisdom. What's going on here? Is there anything like this in the ancient world? Well, not exactly, but the concepts they represent can help us. That is, both trees provide that which is God's to give. God is the one who is the source of life and the giver of life. God is the one who is the source of wisdom and the giver of wisdom. And wisdom leads to order. God ordered the world, and he created humans in his image to work alongside him, providing for more order in the world. And so we find that God is the source of both life and order. And if God is the source and center of both of those things, the giver of both of those things, then we can understand how relationship with God is the beginning of wisdom. So rather than think of these as magical trees in a garden paradise, think of them in relationship to the presence of God on earth and what relationship with him makes available. Now we need to turn our attention specifically to the wisdom tree, because that's the one that was prohibited. We have to be careful about understanding how the text frames the prohibition. When you eat from it, you will be doomed to die. Be careful about interpreting that as if it says that within 24 hours in the day that you eat from it, you will drop dead. It doesn't say that. The particular Hebrew structure of the syntax here suggests not immediate death, but doomed to death. And that's exactly what happened. They were doomed to death. And they were doomed to death because they were kicked out of the garden and therefore had no access to the tree of life. And with no access to the tree of life, then their mortality kicks in. They can't remedy their mortality. So wisdom was withheld from them. Why? Because they were supposed to be using and learning God's wisdom as they worked alongside him in bringing order. They weren't supposed to have their own wisdom to bring their own order on their own terms, but that's what they chose. They chose to seize wisdom as a pathway to their own order, rather than partnering with God to bring his order. They wanted order centering on themselves in their terms. Now, we call this the fall from grace. We call it the beginning of sin. And there's no reason to dispute that, but I'm not sure that that's how Genesis is treating it. It's interesting that Genesis never looks back on this, never sees Israel's sin as connected to this. It never rehearses this scene and talks about this as the way sin came into the world. Again, we can say, well, theologically that makes sense, and that's fine, but we're trying to let them tell their story. So what they do experience is the loss of access to the presence of God, because God's presence is the source and center of order and wisdom, and they chose their own way. Now, they did this, of course, at the prompting of the serpent. So I guess we'd better talk about the serpent for a little bit. The serpent is never referred to in the Old Testament again. The word for serpent is nachash, and he's never identified as Satan in the Old Testament. So their story is not that this is Satan in serpent guise trying to lead people into sin. Instead, they would see the serpent as a chaos creature. A chaos creature in the ancient world was a creature out on the liminal edges. You probably have heard of Leviathan, the classic chaos creature. And they have one foot in the non-ordered world and one foot in the ordered world. And the serpent comes across as a chaos creature. In fact, Nachash is represented as a chaos creature in Isaiah 27:1. As a chaos creature, he serves as a catalyst, disrupting order. God has brought about order. People are seeking order on their own terms. And that's what the serpent prompts them to. Okay, to seize order on their own terms. The serpent is not a major character here. It's people who make the choice. It's people who seize order for themselves. Now, to understand all of this, we need to talk about what I call the order spectrum. The order spectrum is made up of three parts: order, non-order, and disorder. When the story starts in Genesis 1, verse 2 identifies non-order, tohu vavohu. Okay, the earth is non-ordered. I can't go through the details of that. Non-order is the default and ultimately also the undesirable state. Non-order is not evil, it's not wicked, it's not sinful, it's not immoral. Non-order is just the situation before things are ordered. Think about if you're moving and you have your new place full of boxes that need to be unpacked. That's non-order. It's not evil, just hasn't been ordered yet. In the ancient world, order is established by the gods or by humans delegated to that task by the gods. And we see both of those in Genesis 1. God is creating, bringing order, and he creates people to work alongside of him. And so that's the way they understood things in the ancient world. Order was the highest value. So it's no surprise that they focus on it. Order cannot be sustained independently of active agency. If you cease keeping order, order will disintegrate into non-order. We know this about our houses. We know this about our rooms. We know this about sometimes our teenagers. If there's not order being sustained, it tends to deteriorate into non-order. And here we can see God's role as the one who sustains order moment by moment. Order is his work. Now, on the other side, we've got non-order, we've got order, and then we have disorder. Disorder is what happens when someone disrupts the order that someone else is actively working to establish. If that's people working against God, that's problematic because God's order is desirable and the highest value. And so people disrupting God's order is a bad thing. And of course, sin is one way that that happens. But even impurity in Leviticus is a disruption of order. So not all disorder is sin. Furthermore, God can disrupt our attempts at order. He has the right to do that, and he may decide to do that. Disorder in the human world occurs when humans undermine the order that is being sustained by the gods. When humans get involved in forming their own order and it's contrary to God, he may respond by bringing disorder. Use the flood as an example. The penalty for disorder, the violence at the time of the flood, is the return to non-order. The sea covers everything, and then God reestablishes order. In the ancient world, they didn't put all of experiences into the two categories of good and evil, a moral dichotomy. Instead, they tended to view things in the categories of order, non-order, and disorder. And Genesis tells us that story. Their story then is that in Genesis, disorder in God's realm, that is taking wisdom, reverts humans to non-order, banishment into the liminal world outside the garden, where they try to establish order themselves. In the ancient Near East, that's the human prerogative. And they partially succeed. There's cities and civilization, but are immediately undermined by disorder. Examples: Cain, Lamech, the antediluvian population, sons of God, and consequently return to the default of non-order, the flood and scattering. This is the Bible's story. And this is how Adam and Eve fit into this story of order and how it was established and how it's lost.